please subscribe and don't forget to press the bell icon to get notified whenever we upload a new video.
Hello and welcome to the CNBC TV18 special, where we continue to discuss the impact of the tariff and trade wars that are currently underway, largely between the US and China, but also countries like India in the firing line. Joining us now to discuss the implications of what this will mean for the strategic partnership between the US and India is the former US ambassador to India, Timothy Roemer. Mr. Roemer, appreciate you joining us here on CNBC TV18, and thanks very much for your time. Let me start by asking you what you make of the latest developments. This is not just a battle between President Trump and China. India also, unfortunately, finds itself in the firing line, so to speak. How do you see the ties between US and India in the context of the fact that there are WTO complaints and WTO action that has been initiated by the USTR against India, India now retaliating as well? How would you define the current partnership?
Well, nice to be with you, Shireen, and I look forward to talking about this important issue with you and your viewers. First of all, the good news. India continues to be one of the more robust economies in the world, one of the fastest growing economies, if not the fastest, maybe the third largest economy in the world. And certainly we have seen that both in a bipartisan way, the George Bush administration and the Barack Obama administration that I worked with greatly, deeply valued expanding this strategic partnership with India and putting the time in to implement those initiatives in defense, in energy, in intelligence, in counterterrorism, in cybersecurity, homeland security, on economic issues. That's the good news, that the platform and the foundation are there for us to continue to make this U.S.-India relationship one of the defining and most important relationships in the world. I think right now, to the heart of your question, we find ourselves in a challenging position, quite frankly. The 2+2 talks have been delayed now, not once, but twice. We're seeing some issues with trying to match up people in the Trump administration with some of the turnover with the Indian administration. And I think right now probably the relationship is underperforming, underachieving, and undervalued and underleveraged by the Trump administration right now. I know that they want to pay attention to North Korea. I know that this meeting coming up between President Trump and Mr. Putin is important, but still they can put the time and the effort to implement the strategy and continuing to deepen this relationship with one of our most important partners in India.
You said that the Trump administration has treated its relationship with India. At this point in time, you're defining that as underperforming, undervalued, and underappreciated. Why would you believe that is the case? I mean, on the face of it, when Prime Minister Modi visited Washington, D.C. for his first meeting with President Trump, it looked like both sides wanted to build on the momentum that is already part of this relationship and take the strategic partnership forward. Apart from the bandwidth issues that clearly Russia and North Korea occupied top of mind, why else are we seeing this underperformance, to your mind?
Well, it's not only the delay and the postponement of the 2+2 talks. It is also not putting enough priority on trying to resolve diplomatically some of these economic relationships. As you started your interview question, Mr. Trump is going hard after China and on trade issues with a $375 billion deficit between the United States and China on trade. Now, he's pursuing that through Section 301 trade provisions on tariffs on aluminum and steel. He is pursuing that through intellectual property theft and other means that the Chinese steal U.S. intellectual property and economic secrets. And he's also trying to make the statement through our CFIUS, our investment from abroad into the United States, that the Chinese cannot invest in national security types of companies in the United States. So he's focusing on China and trade, and he said he would do that. Now they're having some side effects on the India relationship on trade with some tariffs announced. And I think we need to try to make sure that those economic rifts that we're currently having with India don't blow up into problems that either derail or impact or infect the good relationship we have with India on defense that has been robust, on counterterrorism and intel sharing, on energy issues with LNG gas being sold in increasing amounts from the United States to India. There's a lot of positive things that need to be implemented and acted on, and that takes time and effort from the Trump administration. That takes, their people at the highest levels making sure that they're spending time to execute on these things and further deepen the relationship in areas like the Indian Ocean domain, making sure that India is not pushed toward Russia or China in the strategic relationship in the world.
I want to pick up on the last point that you made with respect to Russia, and this could potentially be an irritant between for the U.S.-India relationship, and that has to do with the S-400 missile defense deal. Now, India making its position clear that they intend to go through with this particular transaction for the S-400. That is what the defense minister has last stated. What would that mean from the U.S. perspective? Do you believe that the possibility of sanctions at all under the CAATSA is a realistic possibility today? How do you see the U.S. reacting if the S-400 deal, which it seems like from an India position, is likely to go through?
I think that's an excellent question, and one that just comes right back to the heart of my previous statements and concerns to you. The 2+2 talks that were originally scheduled back in the spring and now have been delayed until September and postponed, those would be with Secretary Mattis and Secretary Pompeo, and of course their distinguished counterparts on the Indian side, and they would be talking about these very issues. How do we try to resolve this issue of possible sanctions with respect to the Indians for the purchase of this Russian defense system? How do we resolve ahead of time and get in front of proactively this sanctions question with relation to Iran and energy issues? We cannot afford to have these kinds of issues derail and hamper our overall terrific strategic relationship with India, and thereby push India away from us and in a direction that we don't want them particularly to go, and that we've built so strongly over the past 10 years in a bipartisan way. And as you and I both know, Shireen, these kinds of efforts, when we're talking about sanctions with respect to Russia or Iran, we need to have dialogue. We need to be talking about this, in real time, not waiting until September or October when more things could pop up to possibly infect those talks. So, I think this just delays and therefore creates possible more points of confusion. It also delays the possibility of us, getting into resolving some of these economic issues that should not, be so unresolvable or irrefutable that they don't allow us to go forward on the other important strategic defense counterterrorism issues.
Sure. We spoke about Russia. I also want to talk to you about Iran, because that's something that you did bring up in your comments. Now, the U.S. has pretty much stated that it expects all countries to eliminate Iranian oil imports. India imports a significant quantity of Iranian oil. Is this a realistic expectation? Do you believe that the U.S. may, in fact, show some flexibility here? India has so far not made its position clear, except to say that it will deal with Iran on its own basis independently. Do you believe that the U.S. may, in fact, show a degree of flexibility around this issue?
Well, certainly this reminds me of my time living in New Delhi back in 2009, 2010, and 2011 when we had a similar issue with respect to Iran and sanctions. We worked these very quietly and diplomatically and directly with the Indians. And we took, you know, a two-pronged approach. One was we recognize and respect India's ongoing and long-term relationship with Iran, and that they have ethnic and religious and diplomatic and political connections there. However, with respect back to the 2010 sanctions and now these, you know, how do we work together to achieve some common objectives on the international diplomacy realm, where India has also been devoted for 50 years, 60 years to non-proliferation efforts? This is something that one leader after another in India has not only pronounced so articulately, but effectively been a world leader on. And how do we try to get Iran to respect those international efforts on many countries' parts? Secondly, and importantly, back to something I said earlier, how do we help if India does either discreetly or more overtly start to wean themselves and import less oil from Iran? How does the United States work to make up for that with LNG, with solar, and hydro, and you know, other kinds of energy sources, clean energy sources that India is going more and more toward, that Mr. Modi has indicated a preference for? Working both of these initiatives at the same time and dialoguing and talking at the 2+2 about these things, I think there is an achievable way to work this out.
I also want to ask you, going back to the issue of trade and the complaints made to the WTO and the threat that the U.S. has almost held out on revoking the benefits that India enjoys under the generalized system of preference. You know, is this a significant point of leverage that the U.S. is likely to exercise to try and get India to put more on the table, so to speak?
Well, Shireen, you've certainly seen, even before Mr. Trump took office almost 2 years ago, in the campaign, he talked about trade. He talked about fair trade and equal trade and honest trade. And everybody knew that this was going to be something that he was going to put a great deal of emphasis on. I think it presents a unique opportunity between the United States and India to create a new paradigm of a win-win proposition for both countries. Mr. Trump talks about America first. Mr. Modi talks about Make in India. How do we put together trade agreements and talk these through carefully, negotiate these, so that, you know, when Mr. Obama came to India in 2010, we sold a number of things to the Indians, manufacturing products, C-17s, gas turbine engines that were actually made in the United States of America with American jobs, but will help India continue to be a global power, continue to help India be, you know, a power that can be a regional power in disaster relief and create cleaner energy. That's a win-win proposition on trade. And how do we reciprocate that with India when they export to us? A free trade agreement. What can these two great democracies that share the values of human rights, that start our preambles of our constitutions with the same words of we the people. We have all these things in common. We don't have to be going at it as fiercely and ferociously as the U.S. is with China. We have a lot of disagreements these days with China that we need to manage. We have so much in common with India. We need to be able to negotiate and talk through and manage these things ahead of time and not cancel and postpone 2+2 talks, not make trade be something that pushes off strategic partnerships with India on energy, on counterterrorism, on defense exercises, on the Indian Ocean domain, where there's so much where we could work together on anti-piracy efforts and security efforts. So we need to be able to do all these things at the same time, but we need to be at the table talking. And I did see a bit of good news before I walked in for this interview. Blurb on the lines on my phone that said that the United States and India have announced that next week they're going to have representatives meet in Geneva to talk about the aluminum and steel tariffs in the WTO, and at least meet face to face on this. That's a good sign.
Well, Ambassador Roemer, it's always a pleasure. Appreciate you joining us here on CNBC TV18 with your thoughts on where the strategic partnership between India and the US is headed. Appreciate you joining us here. Thanks very much for your time.